Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, Davante Adams not seeing eye to eye with the Raiders front office? Well, that's what the headline will tell you, but what's the real story behind the headline? You'll hear that and a whole lot more coming up on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for May 17th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest edition of the show. And, of course, if you're checking us out on YouTube, you know we appreciate you for whatever time you give us, 5 minutes or 55 minutes, whatever the case may be. We appreciate that, and we appreciate my man Ari, who has us on YouTube each and every day. You can find him on Twitter at Ari Produces. If you ever want to chime in on the show and talk about what we're talking about or whatever's at the top of your mind, you can do that at 707-654-4693. That's the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. Of course, you can hit me up on Twitter as well at your boy Q254. All the conversations on Tuesday were about Davante Adams and him not seeing eye to eye with the Raiders organization, and outlets were putting out there that Davante Adams is going to be looking for a trade. And I think every single team, I saw the Packers, the Giants, the Eagles, other like team sites, not the exact team, not like Giants.com or Packers.com, but, team fans, websites and all that, putting out all kind of different stuff about Davante Adams and him wanting to trade. I saw outlets that I really respect, like Pro Football Network, know a lot of people there talking about, well, Davante Adams hasn't asked for a trade yet, but he's clearly not happy in Vegas. And it was just incredible because when I was seeing all that on the internet, I kept saying, are these people reading the articles? Are they actually reading the article, or are they looking for something that could be really catchy that can get Raider Nation all hot and bothered and all up in a tizzy about what's going on? And some folks hitting me up talking about, CQ, told you the coaches suck. Told you this front office don't know what they're doing. Davante Adams wants out. And I was like, slow down, slow your roll. Like, it's okay to take your own perception from the piece that's put out there, but read the piece thoroughly before you get the idea of what's really being said. So Mirin from The Ringer, she put out a really good piece on Davante Adams and the race against time. And the opening line on it says, a trade to the Las Vegas last year gave the all-pro receiver the fresh start and individual validation he needed. But now he's 30 and trying to chase a championship without the only quarterbacks he's ever known, obviously that being Derek Carr going back to college, Aaron Rodgers to start off his career, Derek Carr again. And, well, now this year, obviously he's got Jimmy G. Had a couple games at the end of last season with Jarrett Stidham, but that really didn't count. So Mirin from The Ringer joined my radio show on Tuesday to talk about, well, the headlines that are floating around the internet, but also the actual piece, the whole piece that she did. And look, she's a New York's bestseller. She has a piece out, or a book out, on Giannis, the Greek Freak. And it was not even a book that was supposed to be on the Greek Freak. It was supposed to be on his brother. And then all of a sudden she started talking to his brother, and then boom, it ended up being about Giannis, and it turned into a bestseller there in New York. She's working on another book as well. You'll hear that in the interview coming up in the show today, but really good author. Took a lot of time and a lot of work in this piece that she put out on The Ringer. And for the most part, most people didn't even give it the courtesy to read the whole thing. They tried to read the Cliff Notes, and that just didn't do it any justice. So you'll hear my conversation, about 25 minutes of the conversation that I had with her on Raider Nation Radio 920 on Tuesday. Really good stuff. That'll come up in segment number 2 and segment number 3. But right here in segment number 1, I like to do news and notes of the day. And I'll tell you off top, there's not really a whole lot of news because, as I mentioned, when it comes to the Raiders, well, everything was about Davante Adams. But I did have multiple people hit me up and ask about Marcus Peters and how that meeting and that free agent visit that he had at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center on Monday, how that went. And honestly, Raider Nation, there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to, report about just yet. Most likely what he did is come in, get a physical, talk to the organization. They probably talked to him about what kind of role that they would see him fit if they did go ahead and sign him. They may have talked about a little bit of money, what it might cost, what he's looking for, what they're looking at spending if they decide to bring him in. But most likely they're probably just kicking the tires on him to see what he's got left, if he's got anything left, if they decide to make a move and go and sign a veteran cornerback. And on top of that, Marcus Peters may be doing a little bit of fact-finding at the same time. He might want to talk to as many teams as possible, see if there's a better opportunity for him, maybe a chance to win, like an organization that just needs a corner. He might want to wait a little while, see if a guy gets injured during training camp, and then maybe they sign him in emergency, and maybe he's in a better situation. Maybe he can make more money. When you're a free agent and you're 30, most guys don't really rush to go sign a deal. Some might sign a 1-year prove-it deal. Some guys may be looking for multiple-year deals. I'm not too sure what Marcus Peters is looking for, but as of right now, there's nothing to report about the free agent visit that he had on Monday at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center. Now, I did want to bring up, right before we wrap up segment number 1, I did want to bring up the Black Friday game that I talked about quite a bit before the schedule release. And anyone who's listened to the show for, more than a show or two knows that I really thought that the Raiders should host that Black Friday game, the very first Black Friday game at Allegiant Stadium. And I'll say this, I honestly believe that they should host it every year. I'll go to my grave and feel that way. And regardless how you feel about it, that's fine. But I just think it makes all the sense in the world. You got the black hole as far as the fan base. You got the black stadium as far as Allegiant Stadium, the silver and black. I mean, it all makes sense. The Cowboys and the Lions, they have Thanksgiving. Why can't the Raiders have Black Friday? But we all know that the teams that got it were the Jets and the Dolphins this upcoming year. But it's funny, Adam Schefter has his podcast out on ESPN, and he actually had longtime league executive Mike North on, and they were talking about that Black Friday game. That was one of the many different subjects they talked about, and apparently there was a bunch of different teams that were lobbying for that game, not only to host it for the first time, but host it long-term and do it every single year like the Cowboys and the Lions do on Thanksgiving. Those teams included the Jets, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Eagles and Giants were considered about that game. The Bengals and the Steelers and the Ravens. There was a bunch of different teams that were thought about. And it's funny because a lot of people thought that I was kind of crazy when I said that the Raiders should do it every single year. And apparently I wasn't the only one who thought that. Apparently league executive Mike North thought that it would make sense for the Raiders to host that game as well. So it's funny, Ari Mayrob from the 33rdteam.com, you can find him on Twitter at MySportsUpdate, does a fantastic job. He always has a lot of NFL insider news. I saw him last time at the owners' meetings in Phoenix not too long ago. Always great to catch up with him. He has all the details on everything going on NFL-wise. He was on my radio show on Friday, and it's funny, I saw a tweet saying that Cincinnati, that the Bengals wanted that game each and every year. And so I started off the interview telling him that his tweet that he put out made me mad, not because he said something wrong, but because the Cincinnati Bengals were basically stealing my idea for that Black Friday game. So here's just a couple minutes of that conversation talking about the Raiders and that Black Friday game and the fact that Mike North thought that they should be hosting the game as well. Check it out. One of your tweets made me angry, and not because you sent out a tweet that was bad or anything. It was just the fact that the NFL and a certain team was on the same page that I was, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals. Apparently, they were asking the NFL if they can have that Black Friday game all the time, like the Cowboys and the Lions. And I already thought that the Raiders should have that. I thought that that was a Raiders home game. Clearly it wasn't, but Cincinnati was with me. They had the same idea I did. What are your thoughts on that Black Friday game?
Mike North, one of the NFL schedule makers, when he said that on the media call today, he actually mentioned the Raiders. I'm not sure if you heard about this, but he was one of the people in the group of schedule makers who thought putting a Black Friday game in the black hole makes more sense. And the NFL essentially had Amazon come to them and basically suggest that putting the first ever Black Friday game in the biggest retail market, which is New York, makes more sense for them. And that's what the suggestion they made. And eventually the NFL and the rest of the schedule makers agreed to that and put Dolphins Jets there. But Mike North, who is one of the guys who has been there the longest when it comes to schedule making, thought putting the Raiders on Black Friday made more sense. He openly said that on today's conference call. So he was kind of with you.
That's what I'm talking. See, I'm not a dummy after all. That's what everyone thought I was insane. Damon thought I was crazy.
I'm mad that you mentioned that, Ari.
He's never going to hear the end of it now that I was on to something. So is this something, Ari, that you think it's going to be a rotated game every year, or do you think at some point some team will get it like the Cowboys and Lions?
Well, it sounds like there is no official agreement in place to do whatever it is, but I would be surprised if, let's just say, the Jets or the Dolphins are on it again next year, for example. I think for now, the goal is to rotate it. When he did talk on the call today, he mentioned that they discussed the Raiders. They discussed Giants, Eagles. They discussed who else was there? There were a couple of other teams as well. But it sounds like for now it's going to rotate. But the idea of putting the first one ever in New York was something that Amazon suggested. And I would expect Roger Goodell was the one who probably said, let's do what Amazon was saying because they're paying a lot of money.
So see, Raider Nation, I wasn't crazy, right? Ari Mayrov right there from the 33team.com. They do a great job on that website, by the way. They've got a lot of longtime executives. They got NFL players. They got coaches. They got Hall of Famers. They got insiders. They got a lot of good people that work at the 33team.com. Ari Mayrov is one of them, so he joins my radio show every once in a while just to give us, an update on all things NFL. But Amazon, they wanted to put the game in the biggest retail market. So there you go. That's why it's in New York. That's why it's the Jets and the Dolphins. I still think that, you could have saved that Black Friday game. If you had to put it in New York, I think you could have done Raiders and the Jets that Black Friday game. But still, honestly, I don't care about the Raiders going to New York and play that game in New York in the biggest retail market like Amazon's saying, because I still think that game belongs at Allegiant Stadium. But that's just me. The one thing I think is pretty cool is that it has not been set in stone that it's going to be a team hosted every single year. Yeah, right now it looks like it's going to rotate. So I would expect sooner rather than later the Raiders will definitely host that Black Friday game. Obviously, it won't be this year as the Dolphins and Jets are playing in the very first one. So that's all I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 2 will be part 1 of my interview with the Ringers' Mirin Fader, talking all things Davante Adams and the race against time. That's coming up in segment number 2 after I tell you about Built Bar. You can check out the website like I do each and every day, Built.com, and see what they have. They always have a bunch of new stuff, and they always have a bunch of limited time edition flavors like Red Velvet Puff. That's available right now. Birthday Cake Puff, Peanut Butter Bar, Cookie Dough Chunk Puff, Peanut Butter Puff, Coconut Brownie Strip Bar. They've got just about everything, a lot of peanut butter. And I'm a big peanut butter fan, so those are always the ones that stick out to me. But they've got flavors for everyone. Chocolate Coconut Granola, Chocolate Peanut Butter Granola. There's that peanut butter again. They even have, check this out, I've mentioned it a couple times, but they even have Peanut Butter Brownie Balls. That's right. Peanut butter brownie balls are available, so you can get those as well. They're about the size of Whoppers. Remember that old school candy, the Whoppers? Yeah, that's what the peanut butter brownie balls are all about. You can check them out on the website, built.com. But again, I've said it so many times, there's something for everyone, no matter what your favorite flavor is. How about cookies and cream puff? That's cookies and cream with marshmallow. Cookie dough chunk puff, coconut brownie strip bar, birthday cake puff. They've got everything for everyone. And they're very low in calories, very low in sugar, high in protein. So if you just need a snack, you need a pick-me-up, you don't want to ruin your appetite for dinner, you just want to get through the workday and you need something to snack on, Built Bar is the way to go. Check it out on the website today, Built.com. Use that promo code LOCKEDON15. It's all one word. You'll save 15% off your order when you go to checkout. And if you're in the Las Vegas area, you can walk into a Sam's Club. You can walk into, a Costco. You can walk into a Walmart, and you can get Built Bars right off the shelf. So check them out today, Built.com. Use that promo code LOCKEDON15. Get the order sent right to your house. Save 15% off the order at the same time. Or you can walk into your nearest, like I said, Sam's Club, Smith's. Smith's has them available. Plenty of different places has them available right there on the shelf. You can get them today at Built.com. That's the easiest way to get them sent right to your house. But check them out, Built Bar. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to jump into part 1 of my interview with the Ringers' Mirin Fader. She was talking about her piece on Davante Adams that caught like wildfire, but not enough of it caught like wildfire. Again, Davante Adams in the race against time, a trade to Las Vegas last year, gave the all-pro receiver the fresh start and individual validation he needed, but now he's 30 and trying to chase a championship without the only quarterbacks he's ever known. So I start out this conversation talking about her piece and the fact that Davante Adams is not seeing eye to eye with the Raiders organization is all that people are hanging their hats on, and that's all that people are talking about. But in this piece, as you'll hear, it's a lot more than that. Here's part 1 of that conversation with the Ringers' Mirin Fader. Your piece today caught Raider Nation's eye, as I'm sure you know, you're very well aware of. Davante Adams and the race against time, a trade to Las Vegas last year, gave the all-pro receiver the fresh start and individual validation he needed. Now he's 30 and trying to chase a championship without the only quarterbacks he's ever known. And a lot of the headlines right now, as you're probably scrolling through Twitter, you're seeing Davante Adams and the Raiders aren't on the same page offensively. But Mirin, your piece is way deeper than just that.
Well, thanks for recognizing that. And thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I'm like, did people actually read the piece? Unclear. So I really appreciate that because I think he's such a thoughtful person. And he's just at a really interesting time in his life. So I really wanted this feature to give people a sense of what he's thinking, what he's going through.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, again, I read it about 3 times. I've told everyone to go and make sure they read it. Don't look at the cliff notes because they won't be able to digest the whole thing. But let's just start at the top, at the beginning, with the first team All-Pro and how that was so important to him. Not because he's, to prove that he's a really good wide receiver, but to prove to himself that he is that first team All-Pro with Aaron Rodgers or without Aaron Rodgers. How big was that when you were talking to Davante about that little element of the story?
It was huge. And, it really surprised me as somebody that's profiled Davante twice now over the last 5 years, is that he is not really one for validation and awards. Like, he genuinely does not care about that. He always says, if you know me, I'm the if you know type of guy. Like, I don't need other people to know. But in this particular instance, it really mattered. And, he really respects Aaron Rodgers. I want to make that clear. That's very clear in the piece. But when he was in Green Bay, it just felt like a lot of times people wouldn't give him his own due for being talented in his own right. It wasn't just about who was throwing to him. So for him, this last season, putting together the season that he did, it was like, hey, these narratives, they're wrong. Nobody can say that ever again.
Right. And the thing about it is, even though he may have had those feelings of, hey, I'm not getting this validation in Green Bay, and again, not throwing any shade at Aaron Rodgers because he respects the hell out of him, how mature did he show to be by we never heard about it. We never heard that a little bit of that may have bothered him and that he wanted to go out and prove it until he went out and proved it this past season.
It's such a great point, and it's one that I thought about a lot because he could have easily done it so many times, and he just never did. You didn't see it in interviews. You didn't see it on social media. He's just a team-first guy. He's very soft-spoken internally in the sense of, there's inner confidence there. I don't need to badmouth anyone. I'm just going to go about my work. He's always gone about his work, and I just felt like it was so mature for him to say, you know what, hey, this frustrates me, but I'm also not about to do that. I'm here for the team. And so I sort of took his comments for this profile as it doesn't cancel that out at all. It's more just like, you know what, I have distance, I have perspective, and now I want to speak on it.
And the thing about it is I asked him when he signed with the Raiders, I said, how much have you grown as a man from the time that you were in East Palo Alto, going to Fresno State, Green Bay, and now you're here in Las Vegas? And he said a lot. But, Mirin, as I read through your piece, it feels like he's grown up tremendously, more than I could ever imagine. How much maturity have you seen in the different profiles you've done with Davante and just the conversation that you had for this profile?
It's so much. And I think part of that, of course, is not just getting married, but having kids. The biggest thing with kids is just life is bigger than football. Yes, it matters more than so much. It is so important. You give your all to it. But it's like, at the end of the day, his priorities are family first, and that has created such a mature person. I think because of his early struggles in Green Bay, he learned really, really tough lessons early. He learned to rely on his own voice rather than what other people were saying about him. And the more I got to know him over the last couple of years, seeing that growth firsthand, you just see somebody completely coming into their own in terms of realizing that the only opinion that matters is your own. And when you have that type of mentality and you really know who you are and you have true self-confidence, like he talked about in this piece, the kind that comes from within and not without, that's when you start to view life differently. And I think that the fact that he is having this type of success at this age, continued sustained success, has so much to do with the maturity piece.
Mirin Fader is our guest here from The Ringer on Raider Nation Radio 920. Necessary Roughness. She has a piece out about Davante Adams and the race against time. And, I know that, as you mentioned, and he mentioned, that he'll never worry about first-team All-Pro again, but he's done it 3 times in a row. How important and how much do you think it might drive him to try to get to that 5 or 6 number so he can eclipse the great Jerry Rice?
Oh, I mean, he didn't reference Jerry in particular, but he wants it. He was like, of course, I want to keep stacking them up. As if it's a mere stacking them up, no big deal. I'm just going to keep getting them. But that's him. He's at that level. So I definitely know it's important, but it's not like he's checking his stats and,
right.
I need to do this to get that. That's not him at all.
Right. No doubt about it. Again, Mirin Fader is our guest here on Raider Nation Radio 920. Damon's got one for you.
You mentioned Davante and him maturing, but also one of the things that he mentioned in the introductory press conference when he came to the Vegas Raiders was how important it's going to be back on the West Coast. His grandmother had never seen him play a game. So how much has that quality of life improved for him since he has been out here on the West Coast?
It's huge, and it's a major reason why, despite all the team's struggles, he's still not regretting coming here because the quality of life matters so much. For him, somebody who's obsessed with golf, if there's a tough loss, he can go out and play and not have to worry about the cold after a game. just, having a place where his family and his mom, Pam, can come. And, when I was there that night, she was cooking while this was happening. And Davante was just so excited because he loves her food. And so just even that alone, the joy that comes from your mom being able to take a quick flight, be there, home-cooked meal. She had amazing chicken and rice that night. Like, those are the things that really matter. And so I think we really need to understand, as Davante said himself, this wasn't like I just wanted to go get the biggest bag and chase this money. Like, family and quality of life were huge.
You mentioned golf there, and that's great because that was one of the parts of the piece that really stuck out to me. I remember Schoolboy Q, he was mentioning how golf is it provides so much clarity for him. So with Davante in golf, how do you think that helps him look at football as a game?
You have to learn patience. It is a game of the mind, and patience is something that Davante is really grappling with right now because on the one hand, like you spoke of the maturity, but on the other hand, it's hard. You want to be great and you want to win. And so when he's playing golf, it makes you focus and be patient and calmer and learn how to strategize and all of those things. But as you can see, even in this game of patience, he's taking score. He's doing all these things when the local pros are like, I'm just here to, have a good time. Davante's competing. So I think he cannot lose that. And I think that's one of his best attributes. I also think golf is such a refuge. It is truly a place of joy for him, and it's really cool that he has that time away to be able to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to devote my energy to this as well. It can only help him.
Mirin Fader is our guest here on Raider Nation Radio 920. Patience, urgency, ambition, and time. All four of those words were heavily used in this piece. Why are those four words so important to Davante Adams?
Because I think right now, in this time, every profile is a snapshot of a person in time, whether they're a famous athlete or not. And I think for him, those are the things that he is grappling with right now. You want so much. You want to win. You want to be great. You want to sustain this resume that you've built. At the same time, you realize, hey, you're going into your 10th year, you're 30. The roster, the things that are happening with the team are not exactly as the way that you want them to be. You want a winning record, all of these things. And so how do you take your ambition and all the things that you want and at the same time be patient as they're not happening and yet still drive forward every single day with a sense of urgency? So I use the word harmonize in the piece because I think they go hand in hand. They motivate him. They drive him. They frustrate him. All of these things are the things that he's grappling with. And I think they're very human elements. I think all of us probably deal with those same exact things in our own lives. He just has to do it in front of everybody else.
And then when you mentioned the word grappling with that term, also something that stood out to me is like being 30, where it was him and Tyreek Hill. They were the old guys when it came to being all-pro at receiver last year. And to us in our daily jobs, hey, being 30, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But for him, when he does have that, he has to have that patience with a team that is struggling. How much of his age is factoring into that newfound clarity that he has of having that patience, even though the team is struggling a little bit?
I mean, it's definitely given him that sense of maturity and wisdom to know that, yes, while I really, really, really want these things and I'm working towards them, I also need to let go and let it happen. I think that was one of the clearest things that I saw in the interview was that there is this very wise older person in the best way that just says, you know what, as frustrating as it is, there's certain things you just have to let go and let it happen. You can try your best, but at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control. And we all know that is something that only comes with age. It's very hard if you're a rookie, if you're a second year, third year, you want success immediately. And I think, like I mentioned, his struggles early on in Green Bay, I do think a part of him really learned a lot about how to deal with patience and struggle and being resilient. And so I think at this stage, it makes sense that he would be more introspective. 30 is a really interesting age, especially for his position, the explosiveness you need to have. And obviously, he's shown no sign, absolutely whatsoever, of slowing down. But I think it's far more interesting to think about Davante intellectually, where he is at in terms of his mind and not just his physical play.
So there you go. As you can see, there's so much into this article. If you have not read it, I definitely encourage you to do it. This interview is really good. I take a lot of pride in the interviews that I do, but it can't even do any justice. Like, you really literally have to give yourself 30, 45 minutes, whatever the case may be, whatever it takes you to read it and really digest it. Before I talked to her on Tuesday, I read it at least 3 times because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. And when I do interviews, I'll take notes. I'll take notes just so I don't forget something, because a lot of times you get a lot of different ideas in your mind and you'll forget some stuff. I had 3 pages of notes that I wanted to ask her about, because this is how good this piece was. From him wanting to be all pro to show that he didn't need Aaron Rodgers, right? To his maturity level, not to have to go and pout about Aaron Rodgers overshadowing him there in Green Bay, even though he realized how good of a player he was, right? I mean, there's so many things to take away, and this is just part 1 of the conversation that you just heard. Coming up in part 2 of the conversation, we will get into the not quite seeing eye to eye with the front office and the offensive game plan that the Raiders are putting together, and how he's going to make it work, and how committed he is to the silver and black, which is something that a lot of Raider Nation got all upset and all hot and bothered about, thinking that, okay, Davante wants out. That is not the case at all. Part 2 of the conversation comes up next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to jump into part 2 of my interview that I had on Tuesday on Raider Nation Radio 920, Unnecessary Roughness, with the Ringers, Mirin Fader. She did a fantastic job talking all things Davante Adams. This is not the first time she sat down and done a piece on him. She was sitting down at his house. His mom was cooking dinner, homemade dinner. He was so happy about that. He's excited about being on the West Coast. He's excited about having the opportunity to try to help turn around the team that he grew up a fan of. And again, a lot of the conversation was just about him not seeing eye to eye with the Raiders' offensive scheme in the front office, which is not what the whole piece was about. But you'll hear us get into that coming up in segment number 3, coming up in part 2 of this conversation that we'll jump into right now. And it really starts off with Damon, who's my co-host and producer, asking Mirin about Davante and the joy of football that he gets. Here's part 2 of that conversation.
When it comes to the joy of football, there was also mention of the camp that he had just right around the corner from our station, actually, at Spring Valley High School. And he was not only being out there, it's his camp, but also participating with the kids and being just having the most fun out there. How much fun is Davante having with football in this stage in his career?
So much fun, and I think that camp in particular, it was such a fun moment because it's almost, I was thinking a lot about time, and I was thinking a lot about the passage of time and how quickly it goes away. And there was this one little kid who came up to him and he was like, "I'm going to be on the Raiders like you one day," you know. And I think, wow, how it just goes like that. You know, a minute ago, obviously a lot longer than that, he was one of those kids wanting to be somebody and make it somewhere. And so I just think it was such a beautiful scene of his joy spilling out, and you know, retaining that childhood sense of wonder and excitement with this game, no matter how frustrating it is. And that's kind of what I meant by perspective and maturity, is that, yes, you can be frustrated, you can have concerns, you can be going through it, but he's in a really good place. Like, he is, I don't want to say at peace, because he is very much striving towards wanting to win and turn this organization around, and he's committed to that. But at the same time, there is this sense of letting go. Like, I can only control what I can control, and I still love this game, and I'm going to accept what is and realize that I've got my family, I've got all of these other things in place that allow me to see that, you know, perspective. I can still have joy while also being real about how I'm feeling.
You know, and that's exactly the words he gave to us following the season. The last time we were in the locker room with him, he said those exact things, how much he loves to go home to his family, and they don't care about Davante Adams, number 17. They care about Davante Adams' dad, Davante Adams' husband, right? That's what really matters. And so you're saying, echoing the same words that he did in the locker room. Again, Mirin Fader from The Ringer is our guest here, talking all things Davante Adams and the race against time. So as I started this whole thing off, the big headline that everyone reads is that Davante Adams doesn't see eye to eye with the Silver and Black or the Raiders and their offensive scheme. So when he talks to you about that, and obviously there's no saying that he doesn't want to be a Raider, but he just, you know, there's conversations that they're having, and some don't agree at the same conversations. But ultimately, to you, when he said that, what did it ultimately mean?
Well, first, I think we should talk about tone, because when we're having this conversation, we're just talking. Like, it's not Davante sounds off,
right?
Davante's upset, Davante's unhappy, Davante wants out, Davante wants to. I don't know how many things I read today. I was like, are we reading the same article?
Right.
So I just want to be clear that this is not a tone of, like, upset or wanting. In fact, he's, like, defiantly doubling down, you know, I'm committed. I want to change this organization. I am here. So I think, first off, just want to say, like, the tone of the piece was very much, like I said, somebody in a good place. But, of course, naturally, has concerns and wants to build on them. So it's that second part of the sentence that people really miss. I have concerns and I'm committed and want to change this around, and help build. So, but at the same time, yeah, of course, like we talked about, he doesn't have all the time in the world. So a rebuild is something that, as you said, it's not aligned with the schedule of where he is in his career. But that doesn't mean that he's not committed. So just want to affirm that. And also that basically he also said really good things about Jimmy, saying he's a really cool dude. So there are just parts that I feel like were not even discussed in all the aggregation.
No, you're right. It's reading the Cliff Notes. It's looking at the headlines just to get clicks by other people, not you, but others out there trying to, just get clicks and get everyone riled up. And it worked, right? Raider Nation got riled up, but that's why I wanted you to, you had the conversation. I didn't, so I wanted you to pass that along so Raider Nation knows, okay, Hugh's not trying to blow something up my backside. He's just trying to pass the message along. And that's why I'm so grateful for you to give us some time this afternoon to talk about this piece. And so I thought that something that was so interesting was the fact that, he wants to take that leadership role, be that guy, be the face of the franchise, where the Raiders have been the face of the franchise by Derek Carr and John Gruden. And now all of a sudden it's, hey, Davante Adams, and like you said, help turn this organization around. If he can do that, how much pride he would take in that. I mean, just how important is that for him to get it turned around here with the Raiders?
I mean, it's huge, and it's like he said, I didn't come here to be cute with Derek. I really want to win. I really want to change this organization, and leadership's such an interesting thing because all his career, obviously, he's been a lead by example type of person, so he's always going to show up, and he's always going to be that example. But I think now at this stage when you're the face of the franchise, I think he realizes that, it requires more than example, and I think looking back, a part that didn't make the piece, he was saying that early on, he noticed just some work ethic things and, he wishes he would have spoken up a little sooner. But, he's coming into a new team, so he didn't want to step on toes. So it took him a little bit to find sort of that voice and knowing, hey, when to step in, how to be that leader. It's a new dance with every team. You're getting used to them, they're getting used to you. And so I think, in some ways, some of the growing pains were really good because you learn exactly how to be what your team needs of you. And nobody can be harder on him than him. So when we talk about leadership, when we talk about responsibility and wanting to change this organization around, if he doesn't do something that he feels is up to his standard, he will be the first person to say that. So I just think accountability is key. Not like I said, it's not like Davante sounds off and they need to be better. It's first and foremost, how can I be better? Right. How can I be a leader? And how can I help turn this around?
I always say that you always want people that are playing for you or working with you or side by side that hate losing more than they love to win, right? And Davante, not looking at his 1,500 plus yards, not looking at his 14 touchdowns or his 100 catches, he's looking at the 7 drops. And that bothers him more than all his accomplishments. The 7 drops are wait, that can't happen. I got to be better. And even the conversation you had with his mom when he's playing dominoes and says, wait, I messed up right there and I can't do that. I got to be better. And she's like, nobody noticed. He's like, I noticed. That to me is the ultimate level of accountability there.
Yeah. And, another part that didn't make the piece was he was talking about this and he was saying that he was his hardest critic. And he was like, look, I'm not full of myself. I want to be coached. I want them to say, hey, you did something wrong. So, I think for him, he's used to, of course, a lot of people praising him because he's so magnificent on the field, but he's not too big time, not too old, not too accomplished to have somebody say, hey, you should have been better on this. You should have been better on that. So I actually found the stuff about his mentality, his humility, his thoughtfulness, his perfectionism, because that's what it is. I actually found that to be the most interesting part of the piece to me.
Because something that you mentioned, that perfectionism that Davante has, he said it frightens him to not be mentioned as one of the best receivers in the league. So how much more not only does he want to achieve in the league, but how much longer does he think, because the tone that he was talking with, how much longer does he think he can be mentioned as one of the best receivers in the league?
Well, he definitely was quick to be like, it's not going to happen anytime soon, when he mentioned the younger receiver. I was just like, okay, no, I got it. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Okay. No suggestion, anything otherwise. I wouldn't doubt you for a second, but I think it was him real quick, just so you know. But he brought it up so many times in the interview, which is why time ended up being the central focus, because he mentioned the phrase father time, and that quote didn't make the piece. But he was like, again, I'm closer to the end than I am at the beginning. So there is a real awareness of it. I would not say it's something he worries about. I think frightens is a good word because, so many elite athletes, people that perform at the level that he does, it's not always, purely winning or doing well. Sometimes the fear is a great motivator. So I actually think that was a really interesting part and a way into his psyche about how he's thinking about things. But it's, like I said, it's not a worry. He is at his most confident. I said to him at the beginning, the first profile I did on you, you really were just sort of like coming into your own in Green Bay and breaking out and becoming the person you thought you knew yourself to be, and it was proving people wrong. Second one was like, all right, I'm older. I'm a dad now. Okay, I'm in this different place. So what is this third stage that you're in? And he used the word confident and comfortable. And he mentioned his family. So I just think confident and comfortable, again, we talk about tone, that's the mode that he's in. He's allowed to be confident, comfortable, and at the same time talk about fear, at the same time talk about concerns. They don't cancel each other out.
No, they don't. And Mirin, this has been fantastic. We'll close out with this. As much as this piece is about a football player and we're talking about performing on the field and, getting the organization turned around and winning and doing it for his hometown favorite team and this, that, and the other, I also feel like every single one of us could take this and read it and take it as a life lesson. And really that could be the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway from this whole piece. Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, learned a lot from him. I mean, I live and die with every story, and it's like, that's not right. Davante, like, he goes through struggles in front of millions. They lose games. Okay. As he said to his friend Nick Robinson, it's only up from here. We can all learn from that mentality.
That was after that Saints game. After 3 catches and about 7 yards or whatever the case was. I remember that one. So
talk about maturity.
Right.
You know? So that's what I mean. It's like perspective. So I think, Davante is a fascinating human being, person, just extremely thoughtful. I learned a lot from listening to him.
Well, I'll tell you what, I learned a lot from reading your piece. I thought it was fantastic on The Ringer. Again, Davante Adams and the Race Against Time. I've encouraged everyone that will listen to go check it out and read it. Don't read the Cliff Notes. Do yourself a favor and read the whole thing. It's hard for me. I always tell people, or I always ask people, what are you working on next? But after that, it's almost a shame that I ask you, but what are you working on next that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, I'm working on my second book. It's a biography of Hakeem Olajuwon coming out in 2024. So definitely keep your eye on that. So I'm excited.
Yeah, as you should be. And again, I want to give you a lot of credit. I know we spent this whole time talking about Davante Adams, but the book that you wrote on Giannis, and I know that it wasn't even meant to be on Giannis to begin with, but it turned into that, was fantastic. And you do some great work. And so I really do appreciate you. And I so much thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
So there you go. That's the full meal deal thing right there. Mirin Fader, fantastic job. You can check her out on Twitter at Mirin Fader. And, of course, she does her work with The Ringer. And, again, I hope you really go and read the whole thing. Take your time. Don't get distracted. Just read it, soak it in. Really good stuff, and I can appreciate a really good piece of writing like that. So that won't be the last conversation I have with Mirin. She's really good at talking about the pieces that she puts out, and obviously has a really good relationship with Davante Adams. So hopefully you enjoyed that conversation. You could always chime in, 707-654-4693. Of course, we didn't get any calls and texts on today's show. I just thought that interview was just way too important to bring to the table, and I wanted to make sure that all of Raider Nation understood what that piece was all about and not what people were trying to lead you to believe that piece was all about. We'll get back to calls and texts tomorrow's show. We'll get more news and notes of the day. We'll have plenty more conversation, not only tomorrow, but the rest of the week here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, because, again, that's what we do. So, Raider Nation, until tomorrow, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.